The moment Lucia Delgado stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Coloma, California, wearing her grandmother's embroidered Mexican shawl, she knew her carefully arranged marriage was about to crumble like sun-baked adobe. It was the spring of 1878, and the small mining town still bore traces of its gold rush glory days, though the fever had long since cooled. Lucia clutched her leather traveling bag tighter as she scanned the faces gathered at the station, searching for the man she had agreed to marry through letters exchanged over 6 months. Thomas Whitmore had seemed kind on paper, promising her a good home and respect despite her Mexican heritage. He had written that he did not care about such things, that love could grow between them. She spotted him immediately. A tall man with slicked back hair and a pressed suit stood near a polished carriage, his expression one of eager anticipation. But as his eyes landed on her, something shifted. His smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. Lucia felt her stomach drop as she watched him take in her appearance, her olive skin darker than perhaps he had imagined, her black hair braided in the traditional style her mother had taught her, the colorful embroidery on her clothing marking her as undeniably Mexican. Thomas approached slowly, his steps measured and reluctant. "Miss Delgado?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and wished he did not. "Mr. Whitmore," Lucia replied, her English perfect but carrying the slight accent she had never quite shed. "It is good to finally meet you in person." He did not return the sentiment. Instead, he glanced around nervously at the people watching them, his jaw tight. "I think we should speak privately," he said tersely, gesturing toward his carriage. The ride to his home on the edge of town was silent and tense. Lucia kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm the racing of her heart. She had left everything behind in San Diego, sold what little she owned after her parents passed away from illness, and used the money to make this journey. She had no home to return to. When they arrived at his modest but well-kept house, Thomas finally spoke, though he would not meet her eyes. "Miss Delgado, I must be honest with you. The situation has changed." "Changed," Lucia repeated, though she already knew what was coming. She had seen it in his eyes at the station. "I had not realized the extent of your heritage," he said carefully, as if choosing each word with precision. "Your letters were written in perfect English, and I had assumed that you were, well, more Americanized, more suitable for a man in my position." Anger flared hot in Lucia's chest. "I was honest in every letter. I told you my parents were from Sonora, that I grew up speaking Spanish at home, that my culture was important to me." "I thought you had left all that behind," Thomas said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But looking at you now, dressed like that, so obviously foreign, I realize this cannot work. What would people say? What would my business associates think? I am trying to establish myself as a respectable member of this community, and I would damage that respectability." Lucia asked, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Thomas looked away. "I will pay for your return journey to San Diego. It is the least I can do, but I cannot marry you. I am sorry." The apology rang hollow. Lucia stood, drawing herself up to her full height, which was considerable for a woman. "Keep your money, Mr. Whitmore. I will find my own way." She walked out of his house with her head held high, though her legs trembled beneath her skirts. Only when she was out of sight did she allow herself to stop and lean against a wooden fence, taking deep breaths of the warm California air. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful but cold comfort when she found herself stranded in a strange town with nowhere to go. "You all right, miss?" a voice asked from behind her. Lucia turned to see a man leading a dusty brown horse down the road. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days outdoors. His clothes were well worn but clean, a simple cotton shirt and denim trousers with a worn cowboy hat shading his face. But it was his eyes that struck her, a warm hazel that held genuine concern. "I am fine," Lucia said automatically, quickly wiping at her eyes. The man stopped, studying her with an expression that was kind rather than intrusive. "Begging your pardon, miss, but you do not look fine. You look like someone who just had their world turned upside down." Despite herself, Lucia felt a small laugh escape. "Is it that obvious?" "I have seen that look before," he said gently. He gestured down the road. "There is a boarding house just up the way run by a good woman named Mrs. Chen. She will have a room for you if you need one." "I cannot afford much," Lucia admitted, too exhausted to maintain pride. "Mrs. Chen is fair with her prices," the man assured her, "and she does not judge folks by where they come from." He paused, then added, "I am Fletcher Garrison, by the way. I work at the Dawson Ranch just outside town." "Lucia Delgado," she replied, managing a small smile. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Garrison." "Fletcher is fine," he said, returning her smile. "Come on, I will walk you there. It is on my way." As they walked through the dusty streets of Coloma, Fletcher kept up a gentle stream of conversation that required little response from Lucia, as if sensing she needed the distraction but not the pressure to engage. He pointed out various buildings: the general store, the saloon, the church, the doctor's office. He mentioned that Coloma had once been the site where gold was first discovered in California back in 1848, sparking the rush that brought thousands west. "Not much of that excitement left now," Fletcher said. "These days it is mostly ranchers and farmers, folks trying to make an honest living from the land. Quieter, but I prefer it that way." They reached the boarding house, a two-story building with a neat garden in front. Fletcher knocked on the door, and it was opened by a petite Chinese woman with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "Fletcher," she said warmly, "what brings you to town today?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Chen." "I have someone here who could use a room if you have one available." Mrs. Chen's gaze shifted to Lucia, and her expression softened. "Of course. Come in, dear. You look like you have had a difficult day." The kindness in her voice nearly broke Lucia's composure. "Thank you," she managed to say. Fletcher tipped his hat to both women. "I will leave you in good hands, Miss Delgado. Mrs. Chen will take care of you." "Thank you again, Fletcher," Lucia said, and she meant it deeply. He nodded and turned to leave, leading his horse back toward the road. Lucia watched him go for a moment, grateful for the unexpected kindness from a stranger. Mrs. Chen led Lucia inside and up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. $2 a week, includes breakfast and dinner, Mrs. Chen said. "I can tell you are in some kind of trouble, but I will not pry. Just know that you are safe here." Lucia paid for 2 weeks, which took a significant portion of her remaining money. After Mrs. Chen left, she sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, letting out all the fear and humiliation and uncertainty she had been holding back. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Her grandmother's shawl was still draped over her shoulders, the bright colors and intricate patterns a testament to hours of loving work. Lucia touched the fabric gently. She would not be ashamed of who she was, no matter what Thomas Whitmore or anyone else thought. But she also knew she needed to find work quickly, or her money would run out and she would be in an even worse situation. The next morning, after a simple but filling breakfast of rice porridge and tea, Lucia set out to look for employment. She tried the general store first, but the owner took one look at her and said he had no positions available. The same response came from the seamstress, the bakery, and the hotel. By midday, Lucia was fighting discouragement. Some people were polite in their rejections, others less so, but the result was always the same. She was sitting on a bench outside the general store, trying to decide where to try next, when she heard a familiar voice. "Any luck?" Fletcher asked, appearing beside her with that same gentle concern in his eyes. Lucia shook her head. "It seems Coloma has no need for my skills, whatever they might be." Fletcher frowned. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything honest," Lucia said. "I can sew, cook, clean, keep accounts. I can read and write in both Spanish and English. I helped my father with his business before he died." "What kind of business?" "He made saddles and other leather goods," Lucia said. "Beautiful work. He taught me some of the craft, though I was never as skilled as he was." Fletcher's expression brightened. "Can you work with horses at all? Gentle them, care for them?" "Yes," Lucia said. "My father believed that to make good saddles, you had to understand the animals that would wear them. I grew up around horses." "Come with me," Fletcher said decisively, offering his hand to help her up. "I want you to meet someone." They walked to the edge of town where a wagon waited. Fletcher helped Lucia up onto the seat and then climbed up beside her, taking the reins. As they headed out into the open country, Lucia felt some of her tension ease. The landscape was beautiful, rolling hills dotted with oak trees, wildflowers adding splashes of color to the golden grass. "The Dawson Ranch is one of the biggest in the area," Fletcher explained as they drove. "Mr. Dawson passed away last year, and now his daughter Emma runs it with help from the hands. She is a tough woman, fair but demanding. She has been talking about needing someone to help with the horses, especially the new ones that need gentling. Most of the hands are better with cattle." "And you think she might hire me?" Lucia asked, hope starting to kindle in her chest. "I think it is worth asking," Fletcher said. "Emma does not care much about what other people think. She cares about whether you can do the work." The ranch came into view, a sprawling operation with a large house, several barns, and extensive corrals. Horses and cattle dotted the surrounding fields. Fletcher drove the wagon up to the main house and helped Lucia down. A woman emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on her trousers. She was in her 30s, tall and sturdy, with blonde hair tied back under a wide-brimmed hat. Her face was sunburned and freckled, her expression no nonsense. "Fletcher," she called out, "you are back early. Get everything you needed in town." "Yes, madam," Fletcher replied. "But I brought someone I would like you to meet. This is Lucia Delgado. She is looking for work and she has experience with horses." Emma approached, her blue eyes assessing Lucia carefully. "That right? What kind of experience?" Lucia straightened her shoulders. "I grew up working with horses, Miss Dawson. My father made saddles and he taught me to understand the animals. I can gentle green horses, care for them, recognize when they are ill or injured. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." "You ever work on a ranch before?" Emma asked. "No," Lucia admitted, "but I am not afraid of hard work or long hours." Emma was quiet for a moment, her gaze steady. Then she said, "I am going to be honest with you, Miss Delgado. Some of the hands might have a problem working with a woman, especially a Mexican woman. I will not tolerate any disrespect toward you, but I cannot control what people think." "I understand," Lucia said. "I only ask for a fair chance to prove myself." Emma nodded slowly. "All right, I will give you a trial, 2 weeks. You will work with Fletcher, he is my best hand with horses. If you can do the work and he vouches for you, the job is yours. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You will have a small cabin to yourself." $30 a month was more than Lucia had dared hope for. "Thank you, Miss Dawson. You will not regret this." "See that I do not," Emma said, but there was a hint of a smile on her face. Fletcher, get her settled in the south cabin and then show her around. She can start tomorrow morning." As Emma walked back toward the barn, Fletcher grinned at Lucia. "See, I told you it was worth asking." "I do not know how to thank you," Lucia said, feeling overwhelmed by this sudden turn of fortune. "No thanks needed," Fletcher said. "Come on, let me show you where you will be staying." The cabin was small but sturdy, with a main room that served as both living space and bedroom, and a small attached area for washing up. It was simply furnished but clean, with a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table and 2 chairs, and a trunk for storage. To Lucia, who had expected to be sleeping in a boarding house room until her money ran out, it felt like a blessing. "It is not much," Fletcher said, "but it is private and the roof does not leak." "It is perfect," Lucia said sincerely. Fletcher showed her where the well was, where to find firewood, and pointed out the cookhouse where meals were served for the ranch hands. "Breakfast is at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper at sunset," he explained. "Cookie is particular about punctuality, but the food is good." As they walked back toward the corrals, Fletcher began pointing out the various areas of the ranch. The main horse barn, the cattle barns, the tack room, the feed storage, the bunkhouse where the single men slept. There were about 20 hands working the ranch, Fletcher explained, and during busy seasons that number could double. "How long have you worked here?" Lucia asked. 5 years, Fletcher said. "I came west from Missouri after my parents died. I was 20 years old and did not know much about ranching, but Mr. Dawson took a chance on me, taught me everything I know. He was a good man." There was real affection in Fletcher's voice. "You miss him," Lucia observed. "I do," Fletcher admitted. "But Emma is doing a fine job keeping the ranch running. She loves this place as much as her father did." They reached the corrals where several horses stood in the afternoon sun. Fletcher leaned against the fence, and Lucia joined him. "That bay mare there," he said, pointing to a beautiful reddish-brown horse with a black mane and tail. "She came in wild a few weeks ago. We have been working with her, but she is still skittish. Might be a good one for you to try with tomorrow." Lucia studied the mare. She was fine-boned and elegant, with intelligent eyes that watched them warily. "She is beautiful. She is," Fletcher agreed. "Just needs someone patient to show her she can trust people." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses. Lucia found herself stealing glances at Fletcher. He had a kind face, she thought, with smile lines around his eyes and mouth. His hands, resting on the fence rail, were calloused and scarred from hard work, but looked gentle. She realized she felt more comfortable with him than she had felt with Thomas Whitmore after months of letters. "Can I ask you something?" Fletcher said, breaking the silence. "Of course. What brought you to Coloma in the first place? You do not have to answer if it is too personal." Lucia hesitated, then decided he deserved honesty after all his kindness. "I came to marry someone. We had corresponded for months, and he seemed to accept who I was. But when I arrived and he saw me, saw how Mexican I looked, he decided I was not suitable. He was worried what people would think." Fletcher's expression darkened. "That would be Thomas Whitmore, I am guessing. I saw you two at the station yesterday." "Yes," Lucia confirmed. "You know him?" "Some," Fletcher said carefully. "He runs the bank. Always struck me as the type who cares more about appearances than substance." He turned to look at Lucia directly. "For what it is worth, he is a fool. Your heritage is not something to be ashamed of. If anything, it makes you more interesting, more beautiful." Lucia felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Fletcher held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked back at the horses, a slight color rising in his cheeks. "Well, it is the truth. Your culture makes you more beautiful." They stayed there talking until the sun began to set. Fletcher telling her stories about the ranch and the horses, Lucia sharing memories of her childhood in San Diego. By the time Fletcher walked her back to her cabin, Lucia felt lighter than she had in days. "Get some rest," Fletcher said at her door. "Tomorrow will be a long day, but I will be there to help you through it." "Good night, Fletcher," Lucia said, "and thank you again for everything." "Good night, Lucia," he replied, and the way he said her name made her heart skip slightly. That night, Lucia lay in her narrow bed and thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she had been on a stagecoach heading toward what she thought would be her future. Now that future had crumbled, but somehow a new one was taking shape. And at the center of it was a kind cowboy with hazel eyes who saw her heritage as beautiful rather than shameful. She fell asleep with a small smile on her face. The next morning, Lucia woke before dawn and dressed in the most practical clothes she had, a simple cotton blouse and a split riding skirt that her mother had made for her. She braided her hair tightly and covered it with a scarf to keep it out of the way. When she emerged from her cabin, the ranch was already coming to life, hands heading to various tasks, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the cookhouse. Fletcher was waiting for her outside her cabin, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. "Morning," he said, handing her one. "Thought you might need this." "You thought right," Lucia said, accepting it gratefully. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. They walked to the cookhouse together, where Lucia met Cookie, an older man with a thick mustache who ruled his kitchen with benevolent tyranny. He loaded their plates with bacon, eggs, and biscuits without comment, though Lucia noticed several of the ranch hands staring at her as she and Fletcher found seats at one of the long tables. Most of the hands were polite enough, nodding greetings when Fletcher introduced her, though a few looked skeptical. One man in particular, a burly fellow named Jake with a permanent scowl, made no effort to hide his displeasure. "We are hiring anyone who wanders by now," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Emma hired her," Fletcher said calmly but firmly. "She will be working with the horses. We will see how long that lasts," Jake said, turning back to his food. Lucia kept her expression neutral, though she felt anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. She had expected this, but that did not make it easier to bear. After breakfast, Fletcher took her to the tack room and found her a good saddle and bridle. "We will start with some of the gentler horses, let you get a feel for how we do things here," he explained. "Then we will work up to the mare I showed you yesterday." The morning passed quickly. Lucia worked with 3 different horses, demonstrating her knowledge of how to approach them, how to read their body language, how to build trust. Fletcher watched carefully, occasionally offering suggestions but mostly letting her work. She could tell he was evaluating her skills, and she was determined to prove herself. By midday, when they broke for dinner, Fletcher was openly impressed. "You are not exaggerating about your experience," he said as they walked to the cookhouse. "You have a good hand with them." "My father always said horses can tell when someone respects them," Lucia replied. "Treat them with respect and they will return it." After dinner, Fletcher decided she was ready to try working with the bay mare. They approached the corral slowly, Fletcher explaining that the mare had been captured from a wild herd and had never been handled by humans before coming to the ranch. "We have managed to get a halter on her," Fletcher said, "but she is still very nervous. Any sudden movements and she bolts." Lucia studied the mare, noting how she stood at the far side of the corral, muscles tense, ready to run. "What is her name?" "Has not got one yet," Fletcher said. "Emma lets the person who gentles a horse choose the name." Lucia nodded, already thinking. She climbed over the fence and dropped into the corral, moving slowly and deliberately. The mare's head shot up, eyes wide. Lucia stood still, not looking directly at the horse, making herself seem as non-threatening as possible. She began humming softly, an old Spanish lullaby her mother used to sing. The mare's ears swiveled toward the sound, curious. Slowly, Lucia took a few steps to the side, still not approaching directly. She picked up a long stick that was lying in the corral and used it to draw patterns in the dirt, keeping up her gentle humming. The mare watched, tension gradually easing from her frame. After several minutes, she took a tentative step toward Lucia, then another. Lucia continued her humming and drawing, acknowledging the approach but not forcing interaction. It took nearly an hour, but eventually the mare was close enough that Lucia could reach out and touch her neck. The mare flinched but did not bolt. Lucia kept up a stream of soft Spanish words, telling the mare she was beautiful, she was brave, she was safe. Fletcher watched from the fence, transfixed. He had never seen someone gentle a horse quite like this, with such patience and intuition. When Lucia finally led the mare on a lead rope around the corral, the mare following willingly, he felt something shift in his chest. When Lucia finally climbed back over the fence, her face was flushed with exertion and triumph. "She will need more work," Lucia said, "but I think she will come around." "That was incredible," Fletcher said, and the admiration in his voice was clear. "I have never seen anyone connect with a horse that fast." Lucia smiled, pleased by his praise. "She reminds me of a horse my father once had." "I will call her Estrella." "Star." "Estrella," Fletcher repeated, testing the word. "I like it." They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, with Fletcher showing Lucia other aspects of the ranch work. As they worked, they talked, and Fletcher found himself sharing things he rarely spoke about. His childhood in Missouri, his parents' death from fever, his journey west alone and uncertain. Lucia, in turn, told him about growing up in San Diego, her father's leather workshop, her mother's beautiful embroidery, the close-knit Mexican community she had been part of. "You miss it?" Fletcher asked. "San Diego? I miss the people," Lucia said thoughtfully. "The sense of belonging. But there was nothing left for me there after my parents died. Their friends helped as much as they could, but everyone was struggling. I thought marriage would be a new start." "And now?" Fletcher asked. Lucia looked around the ranch, at the rolling hills beyond, at the horses in the corrals, then back at Fletcher. "Now I think maybe this is the new start I needed, just not the one I expected." Fletcher smiled, and Lucia noticed how it lit up his whole face. "I am glad you came to Coloma, even if the circumstances were not what you hoped for." "So am I," Lucia said, realizing she meant it. As the days turned into weeks, Lucia settled into life on the ranch. She woke before dawn each morning, had coffee with Fletcher, worked with the horses through the day, and fell into bed exhausted each night. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done before, but she loved it. She loved the horses, the open land, the satisfaction of seeing a skittish animal learn to trust her. Estrella was coming along beautifully. Within 2 weeks, Lucia had her accepting a saddle and allowing someone to sit on her back. Within a month, the mare was being ridden around the corral, responding to commands, her wild fear replaced by confident curiosity. Emma was impressed enough to make Lucia's position permanent, and several of the hands who had been skeptical at first began to come around as they saw her skill. Even Jake, though he never became friendly, stopped making snide comments, but it was her relationship with Fletcher that grew most significantly. They worked together every day, and what had started as a professional partnership was becoming a deep friendship. They talked about everything, their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Fletcher told her about his desire to someday have his own small ranch, nothing grand, just a place that was his own. Lucia shared her dream of honoring her parents' memory by preserving their crafts, maybe teaching others. Fletcher started bringing her little gifts, wildflowers picked on his rides, a particularly beautiful feather from a hawk, a smooth stone from the river. Lucia, in turn, began embroidering designs on his handkerchiefs, traditional Mexican patterns in bright thread. One evening in late summer, after a particularly long day, they sat together on the fence watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Fletcher had brought his guitar, something Lucia had not known he played, and was picking out a gentle melody. "That is beautiful," Lucia said. "Where did you learn to play?" "My mother taught me," Fletcher said. "She loved music, said it fed the soul when there was nothing to feed the body." "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Fletcher agreed. He continued playing for a moment, then said, "Lucia, can I tell you something?" "Of course." Fletcher set down his guitar and turned to face her. "These past months, working with you, getting to know you, they have been the best months I have had in a long time. Maybe ever. You are one of the strongest, kindest, most capable people I have ever met, and I find myself thinking about you all the time, even when we are not together." Lucia's heart began to race. "Fletcher, I know this might be too soon," Fletcher continued, his words coming faster now as if he was afraid he would lose his courage. "I know you came here expecting to marry someone else, and that did not work out, but I want you to know that I care about you. More than care about you, I think I am falling in love with you." Lucia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Fletcher, I have been feeling the same way. When I am with you, I feel seen in a way I never did with Thomas. You do not want me to hide who I am. You celebrate it." "Your culture makes you more beautiful," Fletcher said, echoing his words from that first day. "Everything about you makes you beautiful. Your strength, your kindness, your passion, your heritage, all of it." Lucia reached out and took his hand. "I am falling in love with you too." Fletcher's face broke into the widest smile Lucia had ever seen. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Lucia whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, full of promise. Lucia felt warmth spread through her entire body, a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly if you will let me." "I would like that very much," Lucia said. And so began a courtship that became the talk of the ranch and eventually the town. Fletcher was attentive and romantic, bringing Lucia flowers, taking her on rides through the beautiful countryside, playing his guitar for her in the evenings. Lucia made him things, embroidered shirts and decorated leather pieces, taught him Spanish words and phrases, cooked traditional Mexican meals that reminded her of her mother. They attended the town's harvest dance together that fall, Fletcher proudly escorting Lucia into the hall despite the stares and whispers. Lucia wore a dress she had made herself, incorporating traditional Mexican embroidery with an American style, a perfect blend of both cultures. She looked stunning, and Fletcher could not stop looking at her. Thomas Whitmore was there with a pale, timid woman he had recently married. When he saw Lucia and Fletcher together, laughing and clearly in love, something like regret crossed his face, but Lucia barely noticed him. She was too busy being swept around the dance floor by Fletcher, who was a surprisingly good dancer. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Lucia asked, breathless and happy. "My mother again," Fletcher said. "She insisted, said a man should know how to properly escort a lady." "Remind me to thank her in my prayers," Lucia said. As the evening wore on, they stepped outside for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Fletcher wrapped his coat around Lucia's shoulders and pulled her close. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future." "What about it?" "Emma has been talking about expanding the horse operation, making it a bigger part of the ranch. She asked if I would be interested in running it. He paused, his arms tightening around Lucia. It would mean better pay, a larger cabin. A cabin big enough for a family. Lucia's breath caught. Fletcher, what are you saying? Fletcher pulled back enough to look into her eyes. I am saying that I love you, Lucia Delgado. I love your strength and your kindness and your spirit. I love the way you hum to the horses and the way you throw yourself into everything you do. I love your heritage and your culture and every single thing that makes you who you are. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small turquoise stone. This was my mother's, he said. It is the only thing of hers I still have, and I cannot think of anyone I would rather give it to than you. Tears were streaming down Lucia's face now. Yes, she said. Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her again, deep and passionate, full of love and promise and hope. They were married 2 months later, in December of 1878, in a ceremony that beautifully blended both their cultures. The local priest officiated, but Lucia incorporated several Mexican wedding traditions. She wore a dress with intricate embroidery her mother had taught her to make, and Fletcher wore a shirt Lucia had embroidered with traditional patterns. They exchanged rings and also participated in the lazo ceremony, where a floral rope was draped around them in a figure 8 to symbolize their eternal bond. Emma hosted the reception at the ranch, and it was a joyous celebration. Cookie outdid himself with the food, and Lucia had spent days preparing traditional Mexican dishes to add to the feast. There was tamales and enchiladas alongside roast beef and potatoes, and everyone ate until they could not eat any more. Fletcher's guitar came out along with several other instruments, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Even some of the townspeople who had been skeptical of Lucia came to the wedding, won over by her hard work and kind nature over the past months. Mrs. Chen gave them a beautiful embroidered quilt. Emma gave Fletcher a raise and a larger cabin, as promised, along with a significant portion of the ranch's horse operation to run as he saw fit. As Lucia and Fletcher danced their first dance as husband and wife, Lucia thought about how different her life had turned out from what she had planned. She had come to Coloma expecting to marry a man who wanted her to hide her heritage, to make herself smaller and more acceptable. Instead, she had found a man who celebrated everything about her, who saw her culture as something beautiful rather than shameful. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Lucia said. "How blessed." "I am the lucky one," Fletcher countered. "I get to spend the rest of my life with the most amazing woman I have ever met." "We are both lucky," Lucia decided, and Fletcher laughed and kissed her in agreement. They moved into their new cabin that night, larger and more comfortable than Lucia's original small space. Fletcher carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the center of the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrison," he said softly. "Home," Lucia repeated, savoring the word. And it truly felt like home, not because of the cabin itself, but because Fletcher was there with her. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife for the first time, Lucia felt a peace and happiness she had never known before. Fletcher was gentle and loving, treating her with reverence and care. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking softly about their dreams for the future. "How many children do you want?" Fletcher asked, playing with a strand of her long black hair. "As many as God sees fit to bless us with," Lucia said. "But at least 3. I always wished I had siblings growing up." "3 sounds good," Fletcher agreed. "We will teach them everything. English and Spanish, ranching and crafts, how to be strong and kind." "We will teach them to be proud of both sides of their heritage," Lucia said. "To never be ashamed of who they are." "Always," Fletcher promised, kissing her forehead. The first year of their marriage was blissfully happy. They worked side by side during the days, building up the horse operation until it was one of the most respected in the region. Lucia's skill with difficult horses became legendary, and people started bringing their problem animals to the Dawson Ranch specifically to work with her. Fletcher proved to have a good head for business, managing the books and negotiating sales while Lucia handled the training. Together, they made an excellent team. Emma was delighted with their success and gave them increasing autonomy over the horse operation. In the evenings, they would return to their cabin and Lucia would cook while Fletcher tended to various chores. They would eat dinner together, talking about their day, making plans. Then Fletcher would often play his guitar while Lucia worked on her embroidery, creating beautiful pieces that she began selling in town. Her work became popular, and she found herself with more commissions than she could handle. She began teaching some of the other ranch wives the craft, sharing the techniques her mother had taught her. It became a small social gathering every week, women coming together to sew and embroider and talk. Lucia found herself at the center of a new community, no longer the outsider but a respected member of the ranch family. In the spring of 1879, Lucia discovered she was pregnant. Fletcher was overjoyed, immediately becoming even more protective and attentive than before. He insisted she stop working with the wilder horses, though Lucia continued working with the gentler ones until she was too far along to safely do so. As her belly grew, so did her happiness. She spent time preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, embroidering little animals and flowers onto the soft fabric. Fletcher built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Emma was excited about the coming baby as well, the first to be born on the ranch in many years. She insisted Lucia take as much time as she needed, both before and after the birth. Mrs. Chen came to visit regularly, bringing herbs and advice from her own experiences with childbirth. On a warm October evening in 1879, Lucia went into labor. Fletcher was beside himself with worry, pacing outside while Mrs. Chen and Emma attended to Lucia inside. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Fletcher feared he would lose her. But Lucia was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and just before dawn she delivered a healthy baby boy. When Fletcher was finally allowed in to see them, he found Lucia exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of her embroidered blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were a warm brown like his mother's. "Meet your son," Lucia said softly, her voice hoarse from labor. Fletcher approached reverently, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers curled around his father's finger, gripping tight. Fletcher felt tears stream down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "What should we name him?" Lucia asked. They had discussed names for months but had not settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Fletcher knew. "Francisco," he said, "after your father, so he can carry that heritage forward." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "Francisco Garrison, it is perfect." Their son thrived, growing quickly from a tiny infant into a curious baby. He had his mother's dark coloring and his father's hazel eyes, a beautiful blend of both parents. Fletcher was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, singing to him, telling him stories, carrying him around the ranch to see the horses and cattle. Lucia watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him. She had known Fletcher would be a good father, but seeing it was something else entirely. He was patient and gentle, never too tired to tend to Francisco's needs, never irritated by the crying or the mess that came with a baby. When Francisco was 6 months old, Lucia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the summer of 1881, she delivered another son, whom they named Miguel after Fletcher's father. Miguel was different from Francisco, lighter in coloring with his father's auburn tints in his hair, though he had his mother's features. He was a quiet baby where Francisco had been fussy, content to watch the world with serious eyes. With 2 young children, life became busier. Fletcher had hired several hands to help with the horse operation, giving him more time to spend with his growing family. Lucia had cut back on her embroidery commissions, focusing on the children, though she still taught her weekly classes when she could. The cabin that had seemed so spacious when they first married was now bursting with life. Toys littered the floor, baby clothes hung drying by the stove, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. One evening, after they had finally gotten both boys to sleep, Lucia and Fletcher sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out. Lucia leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. "Are you happy?" Fletcher asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," Lucia replied honestly. "When I came to Coloma that day, rejected and lost, I never imagined this would be my life. A husband who loves me, children, meaningful work, a community. It is more than I dared dream." "I think about that day sometimes," Fletcher said. "What if I had not been walking down that road at that exact moment? What if I had not stopped to talk to you? We might have missed each other entirely." "But we did not," Lucia pointed out. "Somehow we found each other." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Fletcher said, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Then Lucia said, "Fletcher, I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "I want to start teaching the children Spanish, and I want them to know about my family's traditions, the holidays and celebrations from my culture. I want them to grow up knowing both sides of who they are." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Fletcher said immediately. "In fact, I have been thinking we should take them to San Diego at some point, let them see where you grew up, meet some of the people you knew. Your parents' friends." Lucia looked up at him in surprise. "Really, really," Fletcher confirmed. "Your heritage is important. I want our children to understand that, to be proud of it, and I want them to know the place that shaped you into the woman you are." "I love you," Lucia said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," Fletcher replied. "Always will." In the spring of 1882, they made the journey to San Diego, bringing Francisco and Miguel to see the city where their mother had grown up. It was a long trip with 2 small children, but worth it. Lucia reconnected with old friends and neighbors, introducing them to her family with obvious pride. They visited the building where her father's workshop had been, now occupied by someone else but still recognizable. Lucia told her sons stories about their grandfather, about the beautiful saddles he had made, the way his hands had moved with such skill. Francisco, now 2.5, listened with wide eyes, while Miguel was more interested in the chickens running around the yard. They also visited the cemetery where Lucia's parents were buried. She placed flowers on their graves and spoke to them in Spanish, telling them about her husband and children, about the life she had built. Fletcher stood back, holding the boys, giving her privacy for her grief and joy. "They would have loved you," Lucia said to Fletcher later that night, as they lay together in the small room they had rented. "My father would have appreciated your honesty and work ethic. My mother would have loved how you treat me, how you honor my culture." "I wish I could have met them," Fletcher said. to thank them for raising such an incredible daughter. Before they left San Diego, Lucia visited with an old woman who had been her mother's best friend. Senora Martinez gave her a trunk of items that had belonged to Lucia's mother, things she had been keeping safe. Inside were embroidered pieces, recipes written in Spanish, a beautiful shawl, and a leather-bound journal. "Your mother would want you to have these," Senora Martinez said, "to pass down to your children so they know where they come from." Lucia clutched the trunk with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for keeping these safe. Your mother would be so proud of you," the old woman said. "She worried about you being alone after they were gone, but look at you now. A good husband, beautiful children, a good life. She would be so happy." The journey back to Coloma was reflective. Lucia spent time going through her mother's trunk, reading the journal entries, studying the embroidery patterns. She was determined to teach all of it to her children, to keep these traditions alive. Life continued to be good. The horse operation flourished under Fletcher and Lucia's management. Emma eventually made them full partners in that aspect of the ranch, acknowledging that their skill and hard work had made it what it was. It provided financial security beyond what either of them had imagined. In 1883, Lucia gave birth to their third child, a daughter they named Rosa after Lucia's mother. She was a beautiful baby with her mother's dark hair and her father's hazel eyes. Francisco and Miguel were fascinated by their baby sister, constantly wanting to help take care of her. Fletcher was completely smitten with his daughter. He would spend hours just holding her, singing soft songs, telling her stories. Lucia would sometimes find him in the rocking chair he had built, Rosa asleep on his chest, both of them peaceful. "You are going to spoil her," Lucia teased gently. "She is my only daughter," Fletcher replied, not looking even slightly repentant. "I am allowed to spoil her a little." As the children grew, Fletcher and Lucia made sure to raise them with an appreciation for both cultures. They spoke both English and Spanish at home, celebrated both American and Mexican holidays. Francisco and Miguel learned to work with horses from both their parents, showing natural aptitude. Rosa, even as a toddler, was fascinated by her mother's embroidery, wanting to hold the needle and thread. They told the children stories about both sets of grandparents, keeping their memories alive. They taught them about the importance of hard work, kindness, and being true to yourself. And they emphasized again and again that their mixed heritage was something to be proud of, something that made them unique and special. The ranch continued to prosper. Emma eventually married a quiet man named David who worked as the ranch's foreman, and they had children of their own. Francisco, Miguel, and Rosa grew up with Emma's children as playmates, running wild around the ranch, learning the work, getting into the kind of mischief all children do. One day in the summer of 1888, when Francisco was 8, Miguel was 6, and Rosa was 5, a Mexican family came to the ranch looking for work. They had traveled from Sonora, the same region Lucia's parents had come from, fleeing drought and hardship. They spoke little English and looked exhausted and desperate. Many of the ranchers in the area had turned them away, uncomfortable with hiring Mexicans. But when they arrived at the Dawson Ranch and met Lucia, their faces lit up with relief and hope. Lucia spoke with them in rapid Spanish, learning their story, and immediately went to Emma to advocate for them. "They are hard workers," Lucia told Emma. "The father has experience with cattle, the mother is an excellent cook. They just need a chance." Emma, who had learned long ago to trust Lucia's judgment, agreed. The Gonzalez family was hired, and they proved to be exactly what Lucia had promised. More than that, they became friends. Senora Gonzalez and Lucia would spend hours talking in Spanish, cooking together, sharing recipes and stories. The Gonzalez children became playmates for Francisco, Miguel, and Rosa. Fletcher watched as his wife bloomed even more with the presence of people from her culture. He saw how she lit up when speaking Spanish, how she seemed more completely herself. It reinforced his belief that her heritage was a vital part of who she was, something to be celebrated rather than hidden. One evening, as they watched their children playing with the Gonzalez children, Fletcher said, "You know, I think we should start teaching some of the other hands Spanish. It would make communication easier with the Gonzalez family and any other Mexican workers we might hire." Lucia looked at him with such love it nearly took his breath away. "You would do that, of course," Fletcher said. "It is practical and it is the right thing to do. Besides, I have been picking up more Spanish from you over the years. I would like to become fluent." So Lucia started teaching Spanish lessons twice a week, open to anyone on the ranch who wanted to learn. It was surprisingly popular. Even some of the older hands who had initially been skeptical of Lucia showed up, genuinely wanting to learn. It became one more way the ranch felt like a true community. People from different backgrounds learning to communicate and understand each other. And it all stemmed from Lucia's presence, from her refusal to hide who she was and Fletcher's celebration of her culture. In 1890, Lucia became pregnant with their fourth child. She was 32 now, Fletcher was 33, and they had not planned on another baby. But when Lucia told Fletcher the news, his face broke into a huge grin. "Another blessing," he said, pulling her close. "We are truly favored. This pregnancy was harder than the others. Lucia was older now and she tired more easily." Fletcher insisted she rest more, taking on extra responsibilities so she would not overwork herself. The children, now old enough to understand, were excited about another sibling and tried to help their mother as much as possible. In the early spring of 1891, Lucia gave birth to twin boys. The birth was difficult, and for a while the midwife was worried they might lose Lucia or the babies. But once again, Lucia proved her strength. Both boys were born healthy, if small. They named them Mateo and Samuel, continuing their tradition of honoring both cultures. The twins had Fletcher's auburn coloring but Lucia's features, and from the beginning they were inseparable. They would cry if separated, calm only when they could see or touch each other. With 5 children, the cabin was definitely too small. Fletcher and some of the hands spent months building a larger house for the growing family, with multiple bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a spacious living area. It was built in the American style but incorporated design elements from Mexican architecture, with a large covered porch and an inner courtyard. When they moved in, Lucia walked through the rooms with tears in her eyes. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, a beautiful home filled with love and laughter. She decorated it with embroidered pieces, both her own work and items from her mother's trunk. Fletcher hung his guitar on the wall in the living room, along with photographs of their family. The older children adjusted well to having baby brothers. Francisco, now 12, was especially protective of the twins. Miguel, who was 10, was more interested in them as curiosities, studying them with his serious gaze. Rosa, at 8 years old, loved having babies to help care for, insisting on holding them whenever possible. As the 1890s progressed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and thrived. Francisco showed a natural talent for horse training, following in his parents' footsteps. Miguel surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for numbers and business, preferring to help with the books rather than the hands-on ranch work. Rosa was becoming an incredible artist, her embroidery surpassing even her mother's skill. The twins, as they grew from infants to toddlers, revealed themselves to be energetic and mischievous, keeping everyone on their toes. Fletcher and Lucia's love deepened with each passing year. They had been through so much together, built a life from nothing, raised a family. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a glance, moved together with the ease of two people perfectly in tune. One evening in 1895, as they celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Lucia back to the spot where he had first told her he loved her. It was still there, the same fence overlooking the same corrals, though so much else had changed. "You remember standing here all those years ago?" Fletcher asked, holding her close. "How could I forget?" Lucia replied. "It was one of the best nights of my life." "I want you to know that I meant every word I said that night," Fletcher told her. "Your culture makes you more beautiful, and every single day since then has only proven that more true. Watching you raise our children to be proud of who they are, teaching them your language and traditions, maintaining your heritage while building a life here, it has been the greatest privilege of my life." "You gave me that gift," Lucia said, looking up at him. "You saw me when Thomas Whitmore only saw something to be ashamed of. You celebrated what he wanted hidden. You let me be fully myself. And in return you gave me everything," Fletcher said. "A home, a family, purpose, love beyond measure. I am the luckiest man alive." They kissed as the sun set, just as they had 17 years ago. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Garrison family was well established and respected in Coloma and the surrounding area. Their horse operation was known throughout California for quality animals and ethical training. Lucia's embroidery pieces were sold in shops as far away as San Francisco. Their children were growing into capable, confident young adults. Francisco, at 19, was preparing to take over more of the day-to-day horse operations. He had fallen in love with a young woman from town, the daughter of the general store owner, and they were planning to marry the following year. Miguel, at 17, had announced his intention to study business in San Francisco, wanting to learn modern accounting practices. Rosa, at 15, was already teaching embroidery to younger girls, carrying on her grandmother's tradition. The twins, now 8 years old, were still inseparable but starting to develop distinct personalities. Mateo was adventurous and fearless, always climbing trees and riding horses too fast. Samuel was thoughtful and artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Emma had made Fletcher and Lucia full partners in the Dawson Ranch, acknowledging that their work had been instrumental in its continued success. They had financial security beyond anything either had imagined possible when they first met. But more importantly, they had built a family and a community rooted in love, acceptance, and the celebration of diversity. The ranch had become a place where people from different backgrounds worked together, learned from each other, and respected each other's cultures. One Sunday in the spring of 1900, as the new century dawned, the entire family gathered for dinner in the big house. Francisco was there with his wife Sarah and their infant son. Miguel had come home from San Francisco for a visit. Rosa was excitedly talking about a commission she had received for a large embroidered piece for the church. The twins were arguing good-naturedly about something that had happened at school. Fletcher sat at the head of the table, Lucia at the other end, and looked around at all these people they had created and brought together. His heart was so full it almost hurt. He caught Lucia's eye across the table and saw the same emotion reflected there. After dinner, as the younger children played outside and the older ones cleaned up, Fletcher and Lucia walked out to their porch. They sat together on the swing Fletcher had built years ago, watching the sun set over the ranch that had become their home. "We did well, didn't we?" Fletcher said quietly. "We did," Lucia agreed, taking his hand. The turquoise ring he had given her all those years ago still adorned her finger, the stone polished smooth by time but still beautiful. "I have been thinking," Fletcher said. "We should write it all down, our story. How we met, how we built this life, so that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will know." "That is a good idea," Lucia said. "They should know that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that being true to yourself is more important than being acceptable to others. That different cultures can blend together to create something beautiful." "You should write it," Fletcher suggested. "You are better with words than I am." "We will write it together," Lucia decided. "It is both our stories, after all." So they began, spending evenings writing down their memories, recording their story for future generations. They wrote about that day in Coloma when everything changed, about Fletcher's kindness to a stranger, about Lucia's courage in staying true to herself. They wrote about falling in love, about building a life together, about raising children who were proud of every part of their heritage. They wrote about the challenges they had faced, the prejudice and the hardship, but also about the joy and the love and the community they had built. They wrote about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, not who society thinks they should be. As the months passed, and the written record of their life together grew, they found themselves reflecting on how much the world had changed since they first met. It was 1901 now, the beginning of a new century. The wild west of their youth was fading, becoming more civilized, more settled. But the lessons they had learned were timeless. Francisco and Sarah had their second child, a daughter they named Lucia after her grandmother. Watching his son become a father, Fletcher felt the weight and wonder of legacy. This beautiful granddaughter would grow up in a world shaped in part by the choices he and Lucia had made, by their refusal to let prejudice dictate their lives. Miguel returned from San Francisco with a business degree and new ideas for expanding the ranch's operations. He was engaged to a woman he had met at university, a smart Chinese woman named May, whose parents had immigrated from Canton. Fletcher and Lucia welcomed her with open arms, seeing in Miguel's choice the same courage to love beyond boundaries that they had shown. Rosa announced that she wanted to open a school to teach traditional Mexican crafts, keeping the old ways alive for future generations. She had saved money from her commissions and found a building in town. Fletcher and Lucia helped her financially and with the business planning, proud of her initiative and dedication to preserving culture. The twins were growing like weeds, already 10 years old and showing signs of the men they would become. They still did everything together, but their individual personalities were more pronounced now. Mateo wanted to be a rancher like his father, while Samuel was interested in art and design. In the fall of 1902, Lucia's health began to decline. She had always been so strong, so vital, that it was shocking when she started to slow down. At first it was small things, getting tired more easily, occasional pains. But gradually it became clear that something was seriously wrong. The doctor diagnosed her with a growth in her abdomen, likely cancer, though medical knowledge at the time was limited. He could not tell them how long she had, only that the condition was serious. Fletcher was devastated. They had 24 years together, built an entire life, and it still did not feel like enough. He wanted decades more, wanted to grow old together, meet all their grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren. But Lucia faced her illness with the same strength and grace she had brought to everything else. She did not waste time on fear or anger. Instead, she focused on making sure everything was in order, that her children and grandchildren had what they needed from her. She spent hours with each of her children, sharing wisdom, giving advice, making sure they knew how much she loved them. She finished embroidering pieces for each of them, works of art that incorporated symbols meaningful to their individual lives. She wrote letters to be opened at important milestones, birthdays and weddings and births, and she spent as much time as possible with Fletcher, their love as strong in the face of death as it had been in the bloom of youth. They talked about their life together, remembering the good times, even laughing about some of the hard times. They held each other close, grateful for every moment. "I am not afraid," Lucia told Fletcher one night as they lay together. "I have lived a full life, a happy life. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren who will carry on both our legacies. What more could anyone ask for?" "More time," Fletcher said, his voice breaking. "I want more time with you." "We have had 24 years, Lucia reminded him gently. "That is more than many people get, and every single day was a gift." "It was not enough," Fletcher insisted. "It will never be enough." Lucia touched his face tenderly. "Promise me something, anything. Do not let grief consume you when I am gone," Lucia said. "Live fully. Love our children and grandchildren. Continue the work we started together. Find joy in the life we built. That is what I want for you." "I will try," Fletcher promised, though he could not imagine a life without her. Lucia died in the early morning hours of a cold December day in 1902, surrounded by her family. She was 54 years old. Her passing was peaceful, Fletcher holding her hand, their children gathered around, prayers being said in both English and Spanish. The funeral was one of the largest Coloma had ever seen. People came from throughout the region, lives that Lucia had touched in her 24 years there. Mexican families she had helped, ranch hands she had worked with, women she had taught embroidery, men she had taught Spanish. All came to pay their respects to a woman who had made such an impact. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree she had loved. The gravestone was engraved with her name in both English and Spanish, honoring both sides of her identity. Fletcher played his guitar at the service, singing a Mexican folk song Lucia had taught him years ago, his voice breaking with emotion. The months after Lucia's death were the darkest of Fletcher's life. He went through the motions of living, working the ranch, spending time with his children and grandchildren, but he felt hollow inside. The house that had been so full of love and laughter felt empty without her presence. He would find himself reaching for her at night, momentarily forgetting she was gone, and the realization would hit him anew each time. He would catch a glimpse of dark hair and embroidered fabric and think for a moment it was her, only to remember it was Rosa or May. He heard Spanish being spoken and instinctively listened for her voice, always disappointed when it was someone else. His children worried about him. Francisco suggested he move in with them, but Fletcher could not bear to leave the house he had built for Lucia. Miguel offered to handle all the ranch business so Fletcher could rest, but Fletcher found work was one of the few things that gave him any sense of purpose. It was Rosa who finally got through to him, about 6 months after Lucia's death. She came to visit one evening and found him sitting in the dark, holding one of Lucia's embroidered pieces. "Papa," she said gently, lighting a lamp, "Mama would not want this for you." "I know," Fletcher said tiredly, "but I do not know how to go on without her." "You are not without her," Rosa said. "She is in all of us. In Francisco's skill with horses, in Miguel's mind for business, in my embroidery, in the twins' spirit. She is in the way we speak Spanish and celebrate her traditions. She is in every part of this ranch and this family. You just have to look." Fletcher looked at his daughter, so much like her mother in appearance and spirit, and felt something in his chest loosen slightly. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best," Rosa said. "Both of you." Slowly, painfully, Fletcher began to heal. He would never stop missing Lucia, never stop feeling her absence, but he learned to live with it. He found joy again in his grandchildren, now numbering 5 with more on the way. He took pride in watching his sons become men, his daughter become a successful businesswoman and teacher. He continued the work he and Lucia had started, training horses, teaching Spanish, fostering a community that celebrated diversity. He finished writing their story, adding the final chapters about her illness and death, wanting future generations to know her completely. Francisco and Sarah had 4 more children, all of whom Fletcher doted on. Miguel and May had 3 children, beautiful kids who looked like both sides of their heritage and spoke English, Spanish, and Cantonese. Rosa eventually married a kind man named James who supported her school and her work, and they had 2 children, the twins, now grown men themselves, both married and started families of their own. Mateo married a rancher's daughter and took over much of the day-to-day operations of the Garrison horse operation. Samuel surprised everyone by moving to San Francisco to pursue art, but he remained close to the family and visited often. Fletcher lived to see all his grandchildren grown and to meet several great-grandchildren. He remained active in the ranch operations until his 70s, finally retiring when his body made it clear it was time. He spent his final years surrounded by family, telling stories about Lucia, making sure all the children and grandchildren knew about the remarkable woman who had shaped all their lives. On a warm spring day in 1923, at the age of 76, Fletcher died peacefully in his sleep. They buried him next to Lucia on the hill under the oak tree, together again after 21 years apart. His gravestone read, "Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he saw beauty in all cultures and taught us to do the same." The legacy Fletcher and Lucia built lived on. The Garrison horse operation continued through the generations, run by their descendants who carried on the ethical, patient training methods Lucia had pioneered. Rosa's school of traditional crafts thrived, eventually expanding to teach other cultural arts beyond Mexican embroidery. The story they had written together was passed down through the family, each generation reading about how their ancestors had met, fallen in love, and built a life that celebrated both their cultures. It became a family treasure, a reminder of where they came from and the values they held dear. The Garrison and Delgado descendants continued to honor both sides of their heritage, speaking Spanish and English, celebrating traditional holidays from both cultures, teaching their children to be proud of every part of who they were. They told stories about the great-great-grandmother who was rejected for her heritage, and the great-great-grandfather who said her culture made her more beautiful. And in Coloma, California, in the place where gold was first discovered, and where a different kind of treasure was found in the love between a Mexican woman and an American cowboy, their story became legend. A reminder that true love sees beyond surface differences to the beauty of the whole person, and that honoring our diverse heritages makes us all richer. The ranch still stood generations later, now run by Fletcher and Lucia's great-great-grandchildren, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose love over prejudice, celebration over shame, unity over division. And on the hill under the oak tree, 2 gravestones side by side marked the resting place of a love that had transcended boundaries and created a legacy that would never die. Their story was one of courage and kindness, of standing up against prejudice, of celebrating what makes us different while recognizing what makes us the same. It was a story of the Wild West, but also a timeless story of human connection and love. And it began with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy who saw a woman in distress and stopped to help, who looked beyond surface differences to see the beautiful person beneath. In the end, that was the greatest gift Fletcher gave Lucia. the gift of being seen, truly seen for all that she was. And the greatest gift Lucia gave Fletcher was showing him that love could be even more beautiful when it embraced and celebrated differences, rather than trying to erase them. Together, they proved that heritage is not something to be hidden or ashamed of, but something to be celebrated and shared, a gift from previous generations to be passed on to future ones. Their love story became a family legend, told and retold, inspiring generations to be true to themselves, to celebrate their heritage, and to love without boundaries.